Good day everyone and welcome to our review for board exam. Again, we will be doing psychological assessment for today. We'll have another 15 questions for this session. Ready ka na ba? Let's start! Psychological assessment review questions. Number 1. One method of testing reliability is to give the same test to the same group of people 2 times and then correlate the scores. This is called A. Test-retest reliability, B. Equivalent forms reliability, C. Alternate forms reliability, or D. The split-half method. Number 2. One method of testing reliability is to give the same population alternate forms of identical tests. Each form will have the same psychometric or statistical properties as the original instrument. This is known as A. Test-retest reliability, B. Equivalent or alternate form reliability, C. The split-half method, or D. Internal consistency. Number 3. A counselor doing research decided to split a standardized test in half by using the even item as one test and the odd items as the second test, and then correlating them. The counselor, letter A, used an invalid procedure to test reliability. B. Was testing reliability via the split-half method. C. Was testing reliability via the equivalent form method. And letter D. Was testing reliability via the inter-rater method. Number 4. Which method of reliability testing would be useful with an essay test but not with a test of algebra problems? Letter A. Test-retest. Letter B. Alternate forms. Letter C. Split-half. Or letter D. Inter-rater or inter-observer. Number 5. A reliability coefficient of 1.0 indicates A. A lot of variance in the test. B. A score with high level of error. C. A perfect score which has no error. Or D. A typical correlation on most psychological and counseling tests. Number 6. An excellent psychological or counseling test would have high reliability coefficient of, is it A. 50, B. 0.9, C. 1.0, or D. negative 0.90. Number 7. A researcher working with a personality test discovers that the test has a reliability coefficient of 0.70, which is somewhat typical. This indicates that, letter A, 70% of the score is accurate, while 30% is inaccurate. B, 30% of the people who are tested will receive accurate scores. Or C, 70% of people who are tested will receive accurate scores. Or D, 30% of the score is accurate while 70% is inaccurate. Number 8. A career counselor is using a test for job selection purposes. An acceptable reliability coefficient would be blank or higher. Is it A, 0.20, B, 0.55, C, 0.80, or D, 0.70? Number 9. The same test is given to the same group of people using the test-retest reliability method. The correlation between the first and second administration is 0.7. The true variance, like percentage or of shared variance or the level of the same thing, measured in both is A. 70%, B. 100%, C. 50%, or D. 49%. Number 10. IQ means. Is it A. a query of intelligence, B. indication of intelligence, C. intelligence quotient, or D. intelligence questions for test construction? Number 11. Who did research and concluded that intelligence was normally distributed like height or weight, and that it was primarily genetic? Is it A. Spearman, B. Guilford, C. Williamson, or D. Francis Galton? Number 12. Francis Galton felt intelligence was, is it A. a unitary faculty, B. best explained via a two-factor theory, C. best explained via the person's environment, or D. fluid and crystallized in nature? Number 13. J.P. Guilford isolated 120 factors which added up to intelligence. He also is remembered for his A. thoughts on convergent and divergent thinking, B. work on cognitive therapy, C. work on behavior therapy, or D. work to create the first standardized IQ test. Number 14. A counselor is told by a supervisor to measure the internal consistency reliability, like homogeneity, of a test, but not to divide the test in halves. The counselor would need to utilize A. the split half method, B. the test-retest method, C. the Kuder-Richardson coefficient of equivalence, or D. a cross-validation. And last, number 15. The first intelligence test was created by A. David Wechsler, B. J.P. Guilford, C. Francis Galton, or letter D. Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. And now, let's proceed to answers and explanation. Number 1. One method of testing reliability is to give the same test to the same group of people 2 times and then correlate the scores. This is called, the answer is letter A, test-retest validity. The well-known test-retest method discussed here tests for stability, which is the ability of a test score to remain stable or fluctuate over time. When the client takes the test again, when using the test-retest paradigm, the client generally takes the same test after waiting at least 7 days. The test-retest procedure is only valid for traits such as IQ, which remain stable over time and are not altered by mood, memory, or practice effect. Number 2. One method of testing reliability is to give the same population alternate forms of the identical test. Each form will have the same psychometric statistical properties as the original instrument. This is known as letter B, equivalent or alternate form reliability. Here, a single group of examinee takes parallel forms of a test and a reliability correlation coefficient is figured on 2 sets of scores. Counterbalancing is necessary when testing reliability in this fashion. That is to say, half of the individuals get parallel form A first and half get B initially. This controls for variables such as fatigue, practice, and motivation. Number 3, a counselor doing research decided to split a standardized test in half by using the even item as one test and the odd items as the second test, and then correlating them. The counselor is letter B, was testing reliability via the split half method. In this situation, the individual takes the entire test as a whole and then the test is divided into halves. The correlation between the half scores yields a reliable coefficient. When a researcher does not use even versus odd questions to split the test, he or she may do so using random number, merely dividing a test according to first half versus second half. It could confound the data due to practice and fatigue effects. Number 4, which method of reliability testing would be useful with an essay test but not with the test of algebra problems? And the answer is letter D, inter-rater or inter-observer. Using choice D, several raters assess the same performance. This method has been called scorer reliability and is utilized with subjective tests such as projective to ascertain whether the scoring criteria are such that two persons who grade or assess the response will produce roughly the same scores. Number 5, a reliability coefficient of 1.00 indicates, and the answer is letter A or letter C, a perfect score which has no error. As stated earlier, this generally occurs only in physical measurement. Number 6, an excellent psychological or counseling test would have a reliability coefficient of, and the answer is letter B, 0.9. 90% of the score measured the attribute in question, while 10% of the score is indicative of error. Number 7, a researcher working with a personality test discovers that the test has a reliability coefficient of 0.70, which is somewhat typical. This indicates that, and the answer is letter A, 70% of the score is accurate, while 30% is inaccurate. Number 8, a career counselor is using a test for job selection purposes. An acceptable reliability coefficient would be blank or higher. And the answer is letter C, 0.80. And although 0.70 is generally acceptable for both psychological attributes for admissions for jobs, school, and so on, it should be at least 0.8, and some expert will not settle for less than 0.9. Number 9, the same test is given to the same group of people using test-retest reliability method. The correlation between the first and the second administration is 0.7. The true variance, like percentage of shared variance, or the level of the same thing measured in both is, the answer is letter D, 49%. So the key here is simplifying a question. To demonstrate the variance of one factor accounted by another, you merely have to square the correlation. Like what we have here is 0.70. So 0.70 times 0.70 is equals to 0.49. And 0.49 times 100 is 49%. Your exam could refer to this principle as the coefficient of determination. Number 10, IQ means letter C, intelligence quotient. A quotient is the result when you perform division. The early ratio formula for Binet IQ score was mental age divided by chronological age times 100. The score indicated how you compared to those in your group age. 11, who did research and concluded that intelligence was normally distributed like height or weight and that it was primarily genetic? The answer is letter D, Francis Galton. Galton felt intelligence was a single or so-called unitary factor. Number 12, Francis Galton felt intelligence was? The answer is letter A, unitary factor. Sir Francis Galton of England has been recognized as one of the major pioneers in the study of individual differences. Darwin believed that exceptional mental abilities were genetic and ran in family, and said just that in his 1869 work, Hereditary Genius. Choice B illuminates the position of Charles Spearman, who in 1904 postulated two factors, a general ability and a specific ability, or S, which were thought to be applicable to any mental task. As per choice D, it pops on exam from time to time. Fluid intelligence is flexible, culture-free, and adjusts to situation, while crystallized is rigid and does not change or adapt. Number 13, J.P. Gilford isolated 120 factors which added up to intelligence. He is also remembered for his letter A, thoughts on convergent and divergent. Using factor analysis, Gilford determined that there were 120 elements or abilities which added up to intelligence. Two of the dimensions, convergent and divergent thinking, are still popular terms today. Convergent thinking occurs when divergent thoughts and ideas are combined into a singular concept. Divergent thinking is the ability to generate a novel idea. So choice D would reflect primarily the work of Binet and Simon. Number 14. A counselor is told by his supervisor to measure the internal consistency, reliability of a test, but not to divide the test in halves. The counselor would need to utilize, and the answer is letter C, the Kuder-Richardson coefficient of equivalence. Internal consistency of homogeneity of items also is known as interim consistency. In plain everyday language, the supervisor wants the counselor to find out if each item on the test is measuring the same thing as every other item. Is performance on one item truly related to performance on another? This can be done by using the KR or Kuder-Richardson estimate, which are often denoted on exam as KR20 or KR21 formulas. Another statistic, Lee J. Cronbach, or the Cronbach-Alpers coefficient, has been used in this respect. So choice A is incorrect. Yes, the split half method does investigate internal consistency reliability, but it relies on splitting the test into halves. And last, number 15, the first intelligence test was created by, the answer is letter D, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. The year was 1904, and the French government appointed a commission to ferret out feeble-minded Parisians from those who were normal. Alfred Binet led the committee, and the rest is history. In 1905, Binet, along with his co-worker Simon, created a 30-question test with school-related items of increasing difficulty. Binet used his own daughters as test subjects in order to investigate mental processes, and also is cited as one of the pioneers in projective testing based on his work with ink blots. After testing nearly 3,000 children in the U.S. in 1916, Lewis and Thurman of the Stanford University published an American version of the Binet that was translated into English and adapted to American children. In case you don't know the word yet, Stanford was adapted to the word Stanford University. And that's the end of our drill for today. I hope you learned a lot. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell for for updates on our drills. Keep safe and have a nice day.